It began on a cold November evening, when two young couples drove the empty back roads of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Their headlights cut through mist rolling off the Ohio River, pale beams swallowed by the hulking silhouettes of the TNT plant, abandoned bunkers that once stored volatile explosives during the war. The place was a labyrinth of rusting steel doors, cracked concrete, and pools of stagnant water that mirrored the moonlight. As they turned past one of the igloos, the beams caught something unnatural. Standing in the middle of the road was a figure, towering, broad-shouldered, its body cloaked in shadow. Enormous wings, folded tight, seemed to stretch wider than the car itself. But it was the eyes that froze them. Two glowing red orbs, not reflecting, but burning, staring directly into the vehicle as if it already knew them. One of the women screamed. The driver slammed his foot down. Tires screeched, gravel spat, and the car roared into the night. But the creature took flight with a sickening, leathery crack of wings. It gave chase. Witnesses would later recall speeds of nearly 100 miles an hour, that awful presence hovering just behind the car as though it fed off their terror. No matter how fast they went, it stayed near. And then, just as suddenly, it veered off, disappearing into the black horizon. Silence filled the car, but inside them, a dread had taken root. When they staggered into the sheriff's office later that night, their faces were pale, voices trembling, as they told the impossible. A man-shaped bird with eyes that glowed red, stalking them through the back roads of Point Pleasant. The newspaper headline the next morning screamed it into existence. Couples see man-sized bird. Creature. Something. And so began the legend of the Mothman. Word spread quickly in Point Pleasant. The couples weren't the only ones to see it. Within days, locals began whispering about strange shapes circling over the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, the TNT plant's skeletal remains. By night, the old munitions bunkers were silent tombs, concrete igloos buried in earth, their doors rusted and sagging. During the day, they were playgrounds for children. At night, they became shrines of fear. One group of teenagers dared each other to drive out there, headlights off, hearts pounding. As they cut the engine, the air grew unnaturally still. The chirp of crickets died. Then came the rustle of something vast moving in the brush. A shadow uncoiled from the treeling. Wings spread, black, skeletal, impossibly wide. The figure rose onto the roof of the car with a thud that shook the chassis. Inside, the kids screamed, fumbling with the ignition as talons scraped against metal. When the engine roared to life, the roof light flickered, just long enough to reveal those red eyes, staring through the glass, inches from their faces. They sped away, swerving through the back roads, but the thing leapt from tree to tree alongside them. It never tired, never slowed, only watched. By the time they reached the lights of town, it was gone. They tumbled out, shaking, swearing never to return. But the story leaked out, and with each retelling, the Mothman's presence swelled. In the weeks that followed, dozens of witnesses described the same impossible figure, a man-like beast, 7 feet tall, wings wider than a car, and eyes like burning coals. Some said it glided without flapping, as if carried by a force not of this earth. Others swore they felt its gaze pierce their very thoughts, leaving behind nausea, terror, and a lingering sense that death itself had brushed against them. Point Pleasant was no longer just a sleepy river town. It was a hunting ground. And something, whatever it was, had made its nest in the TNT ruins. The TNT area was a place most locals avoided after dark. The bunkers, known as igloos, were built into the earth, their entrances choked with vines and graffiti, their interiors damp and echoing. Hunters and thrill-seeking kids sometimes wandered through them by flashlight, the beams carving out narrow tunnels of safety in the otherwise crushing black. One winter night, 2 men exploring the site pushed open one of the iron doors. The hinges screamed like an animal in pain. Inside, the bunker was cold, breath steaming in the beam of the flashlight. Their boots sloshed through puddles, the concrete walls dripping with condensation. Then they heard it. Not the shuffle of their own shoes, not the hiss of water, something heavier, scraping against the walls, just beyond the reach of the light. The beams swung wildly, catching nothing but stone. The silence that followed was worse than sound. One of the men stepped forward, daring to push deeper, when the flashlight caught a glimpse, two red discs glowing in the far corner. Not reflecting. Glowing. The air thickened. A massive shape detached itself from the wall, wings stretching outward, grazing the curved ceiling of the bunker. The creature filled the space, its bulk impossible, its eyes fixed and unblinking. The men froze, every instinct screaming that they'd made a mistake. And then, it moved. With a sudden rush, the thing surged forward, wings battering the walls, the air exploding into chaos. The men stumbled back, smashing against the doorframe as the flashlight slipped from their hands and rolled, its beam flashing across slick concrete and those talons slicing through the air. Somehow, they made it out, tumbling into the night. Behind them, the creature burst from the bunker with a shriek, half metallic, half animal, that rang across the TNT grounds. The men didn't stop running until the lights of Point Pleasant shimmered in the distance. From that night on, the igloos weren't just ruins. They were Mothman's lair. A place where anyone who lingered too long risked stepping into the domain of something that should not exist. A pair of young lovers parked at the edge of the TNT area one night, far from town lights. The sky was moonless, the air heavy with the scent of stagnant water. Their radio whispered low, some late-night station fading in and out, when a sudden thump rattled the roof of the car. The boy froze, his hand hovering over the ignition. "Did you hear that?" the girl whispered. Another thump, heavier this time, followed by the metallic scrape of claws dragging across the roof. The car's frame shuddered under the weight of something alive and massive. Their breaths quickened as silence pressed in, broken only by the crackle of static from the radio. Then came a slow, deliberate sound, like someone shifting their weight, repositioning, directly above them. The boy dared a glance through the windshield. In the faint starlight, he caught a silhouette perched like a gargoyle, wings partially spread, its outline blotting out the heavens. Two red eyes leaned forward, peering through the glass. They weren't the eyes of an animal, they were fixed, aware, dripping with malice. The girl screamed, and at once the thing launched upward, wings slamming against the metal so hard the entire vehicle rocked. The shriek that followed was neither bird nor man, but something twisted between. The boy fumbled the keys, the engine coughing, headlights flaring to life. For an instant, the beam caught the figure above, skin stretched taut, talons gripping the roof as its head tilted unnaturally far to one side, eyes burning like coals. Then it released, sweeping into the sky with a single colossal beat of its wings. The lovers sped from the TNT grounds, their car roof scarred with long, parallel gashes. For weeks, they would wake in the night to phantom scraping sounds, convinced the creature hadn't just watched them, it had marked them. The TNT area no longer felt abandoned. It felt inhabited. Not just by wildlife or echoes of war, but by something waiting in the shadows, and following anyone foolish enough to trespass. At first, Mothman was confined to the TNT ruins, a monster haunting the outskirts of town. But soon, it began to follow. People whispered that once you saw it, it didn't let go, that its gaze clung to you, carried home like a sickness. One night, a family living on the edge of Point Pleasant was roused by their dog's frantic barking. The father, half asleep, grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The beam cut across the yard, illuminating trees swaying in the wind. But the dog wasn't looking at the ground, it was staring upward, hackles raised, teeth bared at something in the dark sky. The father followed the gaze. At first, he saw nothing but branches against the stars. Then two glowing spheres blinked open, hovering higher than any branch should be. His stomach dropped. Wings shifted, vast and black, stirring the leaves without touching them. Before he could shout, the thing swooped low across the yard, passing inches above his head. The dog yelped once, and was gone. Vanished into the trees, carried off by talons unseen. The family never found the animal's body. In the following weeks, households whispered of shapes gliding across their rooftops, of scratching noises on windows at midnight. One woman woke to find her baby crying in its crib, and in the window's reflection, she swore she saw those red eyes staring in from the darkness. Doors were locked earlier. Curtains were drawn tighter. People began to feel watched, not just outside, but even in their own homes. The sense of exposure gnawed at them, like the creature's gaze could penetrate walls, that it could wait just outside, silent, patient, knowing that at some point, everyone had to sleep. Mothman wasn't just a monster lurking in the TNT bunkers anymore. He had seeped into Point Pleasant itself, making every shadow a threat, every sound in the night a possible warning. The safe boundaries of home were gone. Fear had followed them inside. Mary Heyer, a local reporter, began collecting the flood of strange calls that poured into her office after the first sightings. She would sit at her desk long after midnight, her typewriter silent, staring at the notes piled in front of her. All the stories blurred together, red eyes, black wings, a feeling of being watched. At some point, she stopped being able to tell where the accounts ended, and her own nights began. One evening, exhausted, she returned home and collapsed into bed. Her curtains were drawn, the lamp still burning softly, when she woke with the uneasy feeling that someone was standing in her room. The shadows seemed too deep, the silence too deliberate. Slowly, she turned toward the window. Two eyes glowed back at her. Her breath caught in her throat. The glass pane trembled faintly, as though something outside pressed its face against it. The red orbs hovered, unblinking, inches from where she lay frozen. She couldn't scream. Couldn't move. Her body felt pinned down, as if those eyes alone carried weight enough to paralyze her. When she finally tore herself free of the spell, she leapt from the bed and slammed the curtains shut. The fabric did nothing to soften the feeling. The presence was still there. She sat with her back against the wall until dawn, every muscle trembling, certain that if she looked again, those eyes would still be waiting. From that night on, sleep became dangerous. The moment she closed her eyes, the visions began, wings blotting out the moon, talons scraping across glass, and that suffocating gaze pressing in on her chest. She started leaving lights on in every room. Her neighbors whispered that she no longer looked like herself, that her eyes carried a hunted glaze. The Mothman didn't need to touch her. It only needed to be seen once, to sink its shadow into her mind, a slow infection that never left. By early 1967, Point Pleasant was no longer whispering about the Mothman, it was consumed by him. Nearly every household claimed some brush with the thing, and even those who hadn't seen it felt its shadow pressing over their lives. The local paper couldn't keep up with the flood of phone calls. Children refused to walk alone after dark. Men carried rifles when they drove through the back roads, their hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Sightings spilled far beyond the TNT area. A man claimed the creature landed on the hood of his truck, denting the metal before vanishing into the trees. Farmers reported livestock mutilated or gone without a trace. Families swore they heard wings thundering across their rooftops at night. The police, overwhelmed with calls, drove countless circuits around town only to find nothing but claw marks in the dirt and terrified witnesses babbling the same refrain: red eyes, black wings, the sound of air itself tearing. Fear began to feed on itself. The more people spoke of it, the more the town braced for its return. Neighbors who once trusted each other now traded stories in hushed voices, watching the skies, dreading the next sighting. Every flutter of wings in the night became a threat. Every dog barking outside was a warning. The churches filled more often, parishioners desperate for protection. Yet even inside, eyes darted nervously toward the stained glass windows whenever a shadow passed overhead. The idea spread that Mothman wasn't just a beast, but a harbinger, a living omen that had come to Point Pleasant to signal something far worse. The town was unraveling. Daily life bent around the fear of what might be waiting outside the door. In Point Pleasant, the nights grew longer, the silence sharper, and the sense of safety that once tied a community together was gone. All that remained was the collective gaze turned upward, dreading the moment when the shadow would pass again. Fear had simmered so long in Point Pleasant that finally, it boiled over. One frigid evening, a crowd gathered at the edge of the TNT area, lanterns and flashlights bobbing in the dark, shotguns cradled in shaking hands. Word had spread that the creature had been seen again, circling low over the bunkers, and this time the townsfolk had decided enough was enough. They moved as a mob, boots crunching over frozen ground, breaths puffing like smoke into the night. The woods swallowed their light, the silence thick and oppressive. Each snapping twig jolted nerves tighter. Some whispered prayers. Others muttered curses, trying to hold their courage together with anger. Then the air shifted. A sudden gust cut through the trees, though the branches remained still. A smell, metallic, like rust or blood, slid over the crowd. Someone hissed, "There!" and every beam of light swung upward. At first, they saw only blackness between the trees. Then, two eyes ignited in the dark. Red. Burning. Watching. The shape unfurled above them, wings spreading wider than the bunker roof it perched upon. The lantern light trembled against its outline, never settling, as if the creature was both there and not there, too large to belong to the space it occupied. A gunshot cracked the silence. The blast echoed, smoke curling in the icy air. But the figure did not fall. It launched instead, an explosion of wings, a shriek like tearing metal ripping through the woods. Panic erupted. Some fired blindly into the night, others stumbled backward, lanterns falling and shattering, plunging parts of the mob into darkness. The creature swooped low, close enough that several swore they felt the air ripple, the heat of those eyes brush against their faces. And then, just as quickly it was gone, vanished into the sky above the Ohio River, leaving only chaos, fear, and the ringing in their ears. When the crowd regrouped, their hands shook too hard to reload their weapons. They hadn't defeated the Mothman. They hadn't even touched it. All they had done was prove that it could appear and scatter them like children in its presence. From that night forward, Point Pleasant understood: no gun, no gathering, no numbers would stand against the thing haunting their skies. After the failed confrontation, Point Pleasant shifted from defiance to despair. The Mothman was no longer a story passed in whispers. It was a constant presence, whether seen or not. People walked with their eyes fixed skyward, scanning the treetops, expecting those red eyes to flare at any moment. Shops closed early. Streets emptied after dusk. The once lively hum of a river town faded into silence, broken only by the occasional scream of brakes when a driver swore they'd seen wings blotting out the road ahead. Hunters stopped venturing into the woods. Fishermen refused to cast their lines at night, claiming something circled above the river, gliding silently, waiting. Children had nightmares so vivid that parents began leaving crucifixes or Bibles by their beds. Some swore they saw black shapes pacing across rooftops in the moonlight. Others confessed to hearing scratching at their windows, yet finding nothing when they pulled the curtains back. A creeping paranoia infected daily life. Every rustling tree, every stray shadow stretched too long, became a sign. And it wasn't only the ordinary townsfolk. Police officers reported their radios crackling with bursts of static whenever they drove near the TNT area, as if their signals were being swallowed by something in the dark. Mail carriers avoided certain routes altogether after several claimed to see the figure perched on telephone poles, wings folded like a great black cloak. The town had the look of people waiting for something, not for the Mothman to leave, but for the reason it had come. Conversations in diners hushed at the word Omen. Church sermons thundered warnings that judgment might already be on its way. No one could say what disaster was coming, only that the Mothman was its herald. And then, on a biting December afternoon in 1967, the Omen would finally reveal itself, not in a sighting, but in a scream of metal and collapsing steel. It was the last week before Christmas, 1967. The town of Point Pleasant bustled with shoppers, their arms full of packages, the air carrying the scent of pine wreaths and river frost. The silver bridge arched over the Ohio, its steel beams groaning under holiday traffic as cars crawled bumper to bumper between West Virginia and Ohio. On the evening of December 14th, a trucker swore he saw it. Parked on the riverbank beneath the bridge, he was sipping coffee from a thermos when his headlights swept upward. At first he thought it was a trick of the mist, the steel girders twisting in shadow. Then he saw them, two burning eyes staring back from the highest span of the bridge. The figure crouched there, wings furled tight against the wind, its body hunched like a predator waiting to spring. For a long, terrible moment, it did not move. The trucker could only sit in his cab, frozen, as headlights from cars above streaked past the creature, unaware of what perched among them. When he dared to look again, it was gone. No flight, no sound, just vanished into the darkness of the river night. The next morning, others claimed to see it circling near the treetops by the river. One woman crossing the bridge felt a sudden vibration in the steel beneath her wheels and glanced upward, catching, she said, a man with wings, standing against the winter sky. She drove the rest of the span in tears, certain that she had looked into the eyes of a herald. By now, Point Pleasant was raw with fear. Too many sightings, too many nights robbed of sleep, too many whispers that the creature was a warning. That it had come not simply to terrify, but to prepare them for something they could not escape. On December 15th, the bridge would groan once more. But this time, its voice would not carry cars safely across the river. This time, the scream of twisting steel would echo louder than the creature ever could. December 15th, 1967. Rush hour. The Silver Bridge was choked with cars, headlights stacked like beads of light across the span. Families on their way home, holiday shoppers carrying gifts, truckers crawling forward on weary clutches. The air was sharp, the Ohio River below black and swollen with winter. Then came the sound. A sharp metallic crack, like a rifle shot, that cut through the noise of traffic. Heads turned, eyes searching. And in that instant, the bridge shuddered. Steel moaned, a long, low groan that made the structure tremble like a living thing in pain. Eyewitnesses later swore they saw something else, a massive shape rising from the trestles, wings unfurling against the twilight sky. Some said it perched on the towers in those final moments, watching. Others swore they saw red eyes glaring down as the first section of roadway buckled. The collapse was sudden, merciless. I-bar 330 snapped, a single fracture, and the chain reaction tore through the bridge like lightning. Bolts sheared. Steel twisted. The deck dropped with a roar, dragging 31 vehicles into the abyss. Cars slammed into one another as the structure folded in on itself. Glass shattered, horns wailed, screams ripped across the river as the Silver Bridge tore free from its foundations. Some vehicles plummeted directly into the icy current, swallowed instantly. Others hung for a heartbeat, clinging to torn beams, before gravity wrenched them down. Witnesses on shore could do nothing but stand frozen as the span crumpled like paper. The sound of steel hitting water was deafening, a roar that drowned out every cry for help. Men and women clawed at their car doors as the freezing river filled their lungs. The current dragged metal and bodies alike downstream. 46 souls were lost. And through it all, the stories lingered, that as the bridge collapsed, the creature rose, wings beating once before vanishing into the night. Whether true or born of grief, the idea spread, the Mothman had not caused the disaster, but heralded it. A harbinger of doom, appearing to warn of death too great to escape. In that moment, Point Pleasant's whispered legend transformed into eternal myth. The Mothman was no longer just a shadow in the woods. He was a name carved into tragedy itself. In the days that followed the Silver Bridge collapse, Point Pleasant was a town in mourning. The Ohio River became a grave, divers pulling twisted steel and broken vehicles from its icy depths. Families stood on the banks, clutching coats against the winter wind, waiting for names that would never be called again. 46 dead. Dozens of families shattered days before Christmas. But amid the grief, the stories grew louder. Survivors swore the creature had been there, perched on the bridge, circling above the river, watching as the steel gave way. Newspapers reported not just on the engineering failure but on the whispers of a supernatural omen. The legend and the tragedy became intertwined so tightly that to speak of one was to invoke the other. Soon, the name, Mothman, was etched into every retelling. What began as frightened eyewitnesses describing a man-sized bird, creature, something, was now cemented in popular imagination. He was no longer just a beast of the TNT area. He was a harbinger of catastrophe, a grim sentinel who appeared before disaster struck. Folklorists and journalists descended on Point Pleasant, interviewing shaken witnesses who could barely separate memory from nightmare. John Keel, a paranormal investigator, arrived and began collecting accounts, framing the creature as part of a greater web of uncanny events: UFOs, strange lights in the sky, even sinister men in black visiting frightened locals. His book, The Mothman Prophecies, would later stitch all these threads into a singular narrative, ensuring the Mothman escaped the confines of West Virginia and took flight across the world. The idea of the Mothman mutated, no longer just a monster of red eyes and wings, but a living omen, an angel of death in shadowed form. Each new disaster, from mine collapses to distant tragedies, spawned whispers. Was Mothman seen before this, too? In Point Pleasant, the sorrow of the bridge collapse never faded. But through grief, a myth was born. One that would outlive the eyewitnesses, the town, and perhaps even the truth itself. The legend of the Mothman did not die with the Silver Bridge. Instead, it spread, slipping into the cracks of every disaster where answers felt insufficient, where grief demanded something greater than chance. Soon, whispers of the winged omen surfaced far beyond the Ohio River Valley. In the 1970s, miners in Freiburg, Germany claimed to have seen a tall, dark figure with glowing red eyes at the entrance to a coal mine. Hours later, the mine collapsed. Dozens of men survived only because they'd refused to enter after the sighting. They called the figure Der Schwarzvogel, the Black Bird of Chernobyl. In 1986, just before the reactor at Chernobyl melted down, workers swore they saw a gigantic bird-like creature circling the plant. Some said they received mysterious phone calls filled only with static and piercing screeches, as if the Mothman's warning carried through wires instead of wings. When the reactor exploded, the myth deepened. The Mothman had not only returned, but crossed continents to watch catastrophe unfold. Later still, tales trickled in from New York in the days before September 11, 2001. A handful of witnesses claimed they saw a massive dark shape gliding near the Twin Towers, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Whether hallucination, grief's invention, or something stranger, the connection cemented itself in the public imagination. Each new disaster added weight to the myth. Whether in Mexico before earthquakes, in Russia before accidents, or in the skies above war-torn cities, stories of a red-eyed sentinel followed calamity like a shadow. The logic was never questioned: if Mothman appeared, doom was near. The creature of Point Pleasant had slipped its boundaries, no longer tied to rusting igloos or the banks of the Ohio. It had become an omen without a home, drifting to wherever tragedy lingered, a dark prophet watching as steel, stone, and human lives gave way beneath the weight of fate. The question was no longer, "What is the Mothman?" but rather, when he appears, what disaster waits behind him? For decades, Point Pleasant carried the burden of its legend alone. But starting in 2011, the shadow of Mothman seemed to stretch into a new city, one far from the Ohio River's banks. Reports began to surface around Lake Michigan and Chicago, whispers of a winged humanoid with glowing red eyes stalking the skyline. At first, it was a handful of encounters. Couples walking near the lake swore they saw a massive figure perched on a pier piling, its wings draped like a cloak, its eyes burning in the dark. Joggers claimed something blotted out the moon overhead, passing silently, its shadow rippling across the water. Few believed them, until the reports multiplied. By 2017, Chicago was in the grip of a new flap. Security guards at O'Hare International Airport, one of the busiest hubs in the world, reported seeing a winged creature stalking near the runways. One worker described glowing eyes staring from the treeline as jet engines roared above. Another claimed the figure spread wings wider than a car as it leapt into the air, disappearing against the backdrop of blinking runway lights. The encounters carried the same hallmarks: sudden silence before the sighting, an overwhelming sense of dread, the unshakable feeling of being watched even after the creature was gone. Witnesses described nausea, trembling, and nightmares that followed for weeks. The chilling part wasn't just the number of sightings, it was the timing. Around the airport, accidents, near misses, and security scares followed close on the heels of each report. While no single event mirrored the scale of the Silver Bridge collapse, the implication was enough to terrify. The Mothman had taken residence at the crossroads of America's air travel, a harbinger lurking where catastrophe could claim thousands in an instant. Just as in Point Pleasant half a century before, the community found itself caught between ridicule and terror. Was it a misidentified bird? A hoax? Or had the harbinger truly returned, migrating from the scarred hills of West Virginia to the steel canyons of Chicago? The old question returned, more urgent than ever: if Mothman walks among us still, what disaster is he waiting to witness next? The terror of Mothman has always been this: he never lingers without reason. Where his shadow falls, tragedy follows. Point Pleasant had its bridge. Chernobyl had its reactor. Chicago now waits, holding its breath. The sightings haven't stopped. Even in recent years, reports still surface. Commuters seeing a dark figure clinging to high-rise rooftops, red eyes glowing through the haze of city smog. Truck drivers swear something vast swoops across the highways at night, keeping pace with their rigs before vanishing into the skyline. At O'Hare, ground workers whisper about the Black Angel, circling above the plains, appearing in the corner of their vision before disappearing into the floodlights. But the most chilling detail is not what's seen, it's what's felt. Witnesses describe the same suffocating dread, the same nausea, the same unshakable certainty that something is about to break. It's as if Mothman carries with him the weight of the disaster he heralds, pressing it into the bones of everyone who looks upon him. The question gnaws at Chicago like a wound: what doom is circling above their city? Is it an air disaster? A structural collapse? A catastrophe still nameless but waiting just beyond the horizon? Historians and skeptics dismiss the sightings as misidentifications, folklore reborn in a new setting. But those who have seen him, who have felt the icy grip of those eyes, cannot dismiss what follows. They know what Point Pleasant learned too late: that Mothman is not a story for children, not a campfire legend. He is a mirror held up to human fear itself, a shadow that stands over the fragile constructs of steel and stone we call civilization. And so Chicago waits. The city hums with lights, trains, planes, and endless motion. But somewhere, above the skyscrapers or perched unseen on a rooftop, a figure might still be watching, silent, patient, wings folded until the moment they spread once more. When he appears again, the question will not be if something is coming. The question will be, how much time is left? It was after midnight when David, a ground crew worker at O'Hare, finished his shift. The runway lights still shimmered across the tarmac, the roar of jet engines echoing in the distance. He lit a cigarette to steady his nerves, leaning against the chain-link fence. The city's glow pulsed faintly on the horizon, but here, on the edge of the airport, the night felt vast and empty. That's when the silence fell. The wind dropped. The rumble of engines seemed to vanish, as if swallowed by something larger. David looked up, and for a heartbeat he saw nothing. Then his eyes adjusted, and he realized the sky above him wasn't empty. A shape crouched on the lighting tower. Too big to be a bird, too still to be human. Its wings folded close, its silhouette jagged against the haze. And the eyes, burning red, unblinking, locked on him. David's cigarette slipped from his hand. He couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. His body locked under the weight of those eyes. He swore he could hear something beneath the silence, like the groan of metal under strain, like a bridge preparing to break. Then it leapt. Not toward him, but across the tarmac, wings stretching wider than the tower itself, black against the floodlights, gliding without sound. It vanished beyond the hangars, swallowed by the night. David never filed a report. He never told his supervisor. But in the break room, when the other men whispered about the red-eyed thing on the runway, he only nodded. He didn't need to add his story, because the dread in his bones told him the truth. The creature hadn't just been passing. It had been waiting. Watching. And if the Harbinger had returned to one of the busiest airports in the world, then perhaps the countdown had already begun. Angela lived on the 20th floor of a high-rise near Chicago's lakefront. She worked nights, often returning home just before dawn, when the city was caught in that strange half-silence between last call and morning commute. One winter morning, she pushed open her balcony door for a breath of cold air. The city stretched below her, a scatter of lights reflected in the dark water. Then she felt it, an electric pressure, as if the air itself thickened around her. The hairs on her arms prickled. Slowly, her gaze was drawn upward, toward the rooftop across the street. At first, it looked like a jagged piece of scaffolding against the sky. But then it moved. A figure stood on the roof's edge, impossibly tall, shoulders hunched, wings pressed close like a cloak of shadow. And even across the gulf of 20 stories, Angela swore the red eyes locked onto hers. She froze. Time seemed to stretch, the silence so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. The thing tilted its head in an unnatural arc, watching. Studying. Her legs trembled beneath her, though she could not will them to move. Then, without warning, it unfurled its wings, massive, black sails that seemed to blot out the stars. It leapt into the sky, gliding low over the street, vanishing between two towers without a sound. The city lights shimmered like nothing had happened. Angela staggered back inside, slamming the balcony door. She didn't sleep that day. She couldn't. Because she knew, absolutely knew, that it had chosen to show itself. Not to frighten, not to harm, but to warn. The next week, a construction crane collapsed just blocks away, crushing cars in the street below. Angela didn't tell anyone what she had seen. She didn't have to. She could still feel those eyes watching her through the glass at night, waiting for her to understand what they meant. Tom was a long-haul trucker, used to nights where the roads stretched forever and the world seemed to vanish into his headlights. It was 2 a.m. when he found himself alone on an empty stretch of highway outside Chicago, the cab filled with the low hum of his engine and the static of an old AM station. Then the static changed. It wasn't a song fading or a station dropping. It was a sound, high-pitched, metallic, like steel under strain. He reached to fiddle with the dial, and that's when he saw it. Something swooped across the beam of his headlights. At first, he thought it was a massive bird. But it didn't flap its wings. It glided, impossibly smooth, before landing in the middle of the road. Tom slammed his brakes. The truck shuddered, tires screaming against the asphalt. The figure stood there, framed in his headlights, tall, black, its wings stretching wider than the cab itself. Two red eyes burned in the glare. And then it moved. Not away, but toward him. Slowly, deliberately, as if it had all the time in the world. Tom's chest locked up. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't even reach for the gearshift. The thing crouched low, wings curling around it like a cocoon, then surged upward. With a single, sickening beat, it launched into the air, swooping over the cab so close that Tom swore he felt the roof tremble. The shadow engulfed him, the red eyes flashing once through the windshield before vanishing into the night sky. Tom sat frozen, knuckles white on the wheel, as the truck idled in the middle of the highway. When he finally forced himself to drive, he kept the radio off. The silence was safer. But for the rest of that night, every flicker of shadow in his mirrors, every strange groan of the engine, felt like it was still with him, pacing his rig, waiting for the moment he looked too long into the dark. It was a quiet Saturday night in a suburban neighborhood just outside Chicago. The Ramirez family sat in their living room, the glow of the television flickering against the curtains. Their youngest daughter, Sophia, had wandered into the backyard with the dog, laughing as she tugged the leash under the cold moonlight. Then the laughter stopped. Her mother called out, but no answer came. Only the dog's growl, low and unsteady, carried through the sliding door. When the family rushed outside, the backyard was still, the air so heavy it pressed against their ears. Sophia stood frozen near the fence, her hand slack on the leash. "Sweetheart?" her father whispered, moving closer. That's when he saw it. Perched on the roof above them, wings spread against the night sky, was a figure so large it dwarfed the chimney. Its head tilted slowly, impossibly, until those burning red eyes locked onto the family below. The dog whimpered and pulled free, bolting into the house. The Ramirez family couldn't move. They couldn't scream. The sheer wrongness of the thing pinned them in place. The creature crouched, talons scraping shingles, wings rustling like leather in the wind. Then, with a single push, it leapt into the air, soaring over the yard, blotting out the moon as it vanished into the tree-line. The silence left behind was unbearable. Sophia finally cried, breaking the trance. Her parents rushed her inside, slamming the door, drawing the blinds. They didn't sleep that night. None of them did. In the days that followed, neighbors whispered of strange shadows crossing their yards, of eyes burning in the dark just beyond the porch lights. But the Ramirez family didn't tell their story. They were afraid that saying it aloud might invite the creature back, that once the Harbinger had perched above your home, it was never truly gone. From the rusting bunkers of Point Pleasant to the frozen banks of the Ohio River, from Chernobyl's burning reactor to the glass towers of Chicago, Mothman has never stayed buried. He drifts from place to place, tragedy to tragedy, a black-winged shadow etched into every disaster that demands meaning. For the people of Point Pleasant, the Silver Bridge collapse was more than steel and corrosion. It was proof that their monster had been an omen, a red-eyed sentinel sent to watch as death claimed nearly 50 lives. To the survivors, Mothman was not a curiosity. He was grief made flesh. And yet, the legend refused to remain confined. Each new catastrophe brought whispers of the same figure, tall, winged, unearthly, with eyes that burned like warning lights. In Germany, in Ukraine, in New York, and now in Chicago, the sightings stack like tombstones, each paired with the dread of what came after. The most chilling truth is that Mothman has never raised a claw against anyone. He does not need to. His power lies in presence alone, in being seen just long enough to infect the mind with terror. His gaze lingers, a weight that presses down long after the encounter ends. And always, always, disaster follows. So what is he? An angel of death? A misidentified bird? A living omen born from the darkest parts of our collective fear? Perhaps the answer doesn't matter. Perhaps the power of the Mothman is not in what he is, but in what he represents. That awful reminder that our bridges, our cities, our lives, all hang by a thread that can snap at any time. Look to the skies, and you may find him perched above a streetlight, gliding between rooftops, crouched on a tower. If you do, don't expect him to strike. Expect something worse. Because if the stories are true, the Mothman doesn't bring death. He only arrives to watch. And when he appears, the question is never if something will happen, but when.